v mali šoli kulturnega menedžmenta. Moje ime je 𝑚𝑒𝑛𝑒𝑑𝑧 in v imenu zavoda Motovila vas vse, ki ste se nam danes pridružili v Novi Gorici v Centru in vsem tistim, ki nas spremljate prek spleta, pozdravljam na drugem v seriji 3 strokovnih usposabljanj. Serijo smo v sodelovanju s partnerji in priznanimi strokovnjaki pripravili z namenom okrepiti strokovne kompetence predstavnikov kulturnega in ustvarjalnih sektorjev, zato da bi bolj učinkovito delovali v domačem in pa mednarodnem okolju. Marca smo začeli z finančnim menedžmentom, danes sledi usposabljanje z področja razvoja občinstev in naslednji teden zaključujemo z 3. usposabljanjem z osnovami komuniciranja, tako da vabljeni tudi čez teden dni. Motovila pripravlja ta program male šole v sodelovanju s Centrom za kreativnost in zavodoma Kinoatelje in pa EPK Nova Gorica Gorizia, tako da hvala tudi partnerjem za sodelovanje. I will now switch to English, just to welcome also those participants who have joined online from abroad. On behalf of Motovila Institute, I would like to welcome you to the training dedicated to audience development for the culture and creative sectors. Our guests, experts today are Inês da Câmara and Ilídio Louro, who will shortly take the floor and continue in English in order to provide insight into a complex process of building relationship with audiences and reaching people we want to reach with our activities. The bottom line is we all need audiences. Most of us need more audiences and believe the work we do should have a wider and more diverse audiences. As we have designed this training specifically with the cultural organizations from the Gorizia region in mind, who will be facing the challenge of European Capital of Culture in 2025, I would like to, before we start, to invite Neda Rusijan-Bric, the program manager, program director of the European Capital of Culture Nova Gorica, Gorizia, to briefly welcome participants.
Hello. Dober dan, bom kar v slovenščini najprej in pol sem pozdravila. Sej itak bom samo pozdravila vas, zato ker bi čim prej radi prepustili besedo našim gostom. Še enkrat res hvala, da se udeležujete teh delavnic, tudi danes s posebnim veseljem, da ste tukaj v Centru, končno spet v živo. In seveda vsi vemo, da potrebujemo strategije, kako bomo pridobili več publike oziroma kako bomo publiko sploh pridobili nazaj. Po tem COVID času vemo, da je upad strahovit, tako rekoč, jaz saj vem za podatke po gledališčih, naprimer, ampak mogoče se da s posebnimi strategijami to ne samo da nadomestiti, ampak nujno tudi povečati. So welcome and I will give the floor to you, of course, and have a nice day from me. Bye.
So I just wanted to add a short presentation of our expert, and I will do it in Slovene. So I'm sure my colleague who is following us behind the screen can add links so that those following from other countries can access information in English. Tako da predam predajam besedo strokovnjakinjama, bi rada samo, I want to shortly present you and you can do it later on yourself. Inês je diplomirala iz socialnega komuniciranja in doktorirala na področju komunikacijskih znanosti. Zanimajo predvsem socialna in institucionalna funkcija muzejev, kulturni menedžment, kulturno komuniciranje in pa seveda razvoj občinstev. je predstavnica izvršnega odbora enega največjih oziroma pomembnejših evropskih združenj, Culture Action Europe, in tudi članica mednarodnega odbora muzejskih delavcev ECOC ter portugalskih strokovnih združenj z področja komuniciranja, muzeologije in socioloških znanosti. Poučuje sociologijo, trženje in pa komunikacije. Leta 1999 je ustanovila portugalsko organizacijo 𝑀𝑎𝑙𝑎 da 𝑠edias, ki se posveča odnosom med muzeji, občinstvom in skupnostmi in je tudi direktorica te organizacije. Inês, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hi everybody here in the room. It's going to be a strange event because I think that I never did this hybrid version in such a hybrid way with you guys like sitting and looking at me, and at the same time we have the people in the chat. So I'm going to be looking up and down to the computer, as you know, and I'm also grabbing the mic, but I wanted to warn you beforehand that I speak very fastly, as you can probably have realized by now. You can interrupt me. I'm also going to sometimes check what the chat is saying, just to interrupt. And I wrote this presentation in a very personal way, because I think that what we're needing right now is not very technical content. It's about what are our journeys and how we can really work at this level. In the afternoon, with the people that are here in the room, I will get to know you better, and Ilídio also through the workshop in the afternoon. But now we'll focus on this online version also. So, Tanya and Matea, they wrote to me to challenge me to give a workshop about this idea of audience developing and building connections. And of course, if that was not a theme that was complex enough in itself, they just put in the mix like, oh, and why won't we talk about European projects and working at the European level? And that these aspects or these dimensions are very, very important for me, because I have a company, it's called 𝑚𝑎𝑙𝑎 das Ideias, it's there, 𝑚𝑎𝑙𝑎 das Ideias in Portugal. Our website is not in English. It was at a certain point, then Ilídio decided to redo it, and now it's only in Portuguese because we're still waiting for Ilídio to finish that project. It's very typical from our organizations, right? We start to do something and then there's no time to end it. And we created 𝑚𝑎𝑙𝑎 das Ideias, me and my business partner, Anna, in 1999. I was 25 at the time. So the organization now is 23 years old. And until 2010, we worked exclusively in Portugal. So we are expertised in museum and cultural mediation. We are sociologists from our background. And that's an important part, because we were really focused, our engagement with the artistic and the cultural sector is always coming from the people's part. We're interested in how we as cultural professionals can improve and can enhance how people live their lives and how society works. And the idea is that if we bring in a project where we can join our skill set with people that are interested in the artistic part or in the scientific part, the projects will be better, because we'll have the best of different worlds. So that was basically the way that we created 𝑚𝑎𝑙𝑎. And the fact is that the reason when we decided to go European, it was a big part of our journey, because it really changed what the company is today. And I think it also made us capable to survive different crises. So that's one of the things I want to talk about. So I'm just going to... So this is what we will discuss today. And as you can see, I'm not talking only about strategy or commercial development or even about artistic development. I'm talking about resilience, diversity, and I'm talking also about citizenship. Because one of the important parts of our work here is what we do as cultural professionals and what culture offers to the European framework as we know it. And what we feel sometimes is that even if the European Union talks about culture, it's always sidelining it. So it's always very important to talk about this European identity or what we do as an European model. But we always go for the economics, and we always see culture as a means to an end. And we don't realize that there's an intrinsic value for culture that starts with diversity, the fact that we're all so different from each other. And at the same time, we have this shared identity of being European. I think that's also one of the things that triggered us all in this Ukraine-Russia crisis, to just run to help the Ukrainians because they're European. So we have this shared identity. It's there to be solid, to have solidarity with each other. So during the workshop, we're going to talk about several aspects. And I really wanted to go from like the macro part to the most specific things. So I'll share the references with you after the workshop. This is from a report that was done about cultural and creative sectors. And it's about the value that it has for economic development, job, and innovation. And it talks about who are the people and how does the sector work. So we have the cultural and creative sectors, and of course they are important for ensuring continued development and are the heart of creative economy. But for us, what really gives us resilience as a society is the idea that we build our identities through our cultural and artistic activities. And we also promote innovation, because we usually bring into different sectors other questions. For example, at Culture Action Europe now, we're involved in a tender about well-being, health, and culture. And it was funny because it started a month ago, and we're really, really excited about that. Because, for example, Cornelia, our operational and projects director, was telling me it was the first time that she started a cultural project in a hospital room. That was where the first meeting was. So suddenly you are in a hospital and you're joining people that come from the medical professionals and the health professionals with cultural agents, and you go beyond, the discussion goes beyond. It was really focused on mental health and Alzheimer's and aging. And you know that that's a problem in most of the European countries. And the conversation went beyond the disease. It was about social involvement. It was about the body and how we perceive it. And that's the kind of discussions that happen when you have cultural and artistic professionals in the room. You just go beyond. And you can also ask the difficult questions because you don't have the constraints of other technical areas. And this goes over and over again. They've had, I can talk about them, but I remember that in 2012-11, there was a huge support from the European Commission, for example, to place artists and cultural professionals, but mainly artists, in companies to develop like this sandbox methodology to contaminate, like having an IT company, but then you have a visual artist that's doing a residency there, and so on, so on, so on. Because this purposeful contamination is also a big part of the process. But again, we really have to be very, very careful with this idea that we're always using culture as a means to social cohesion, urban renewal, inclusion, whatever. And we also have to recognize its intrinsic value. It's this difficult balance between this idea of being a means to an end or an end itself. So this is the normal lingo. What is the innovative power of the cultural and creative sectors? And it usually is about generating well-being and cohesion, shaping the public space, modernizing industries and business sectors, provides meaning and a feeling of belonging, upgrades urban and rural areas, designs our products and services, produces and digitizes content, and enriches our visual experiences. No worries. This idea of one of the things that we really have to focus now, and we were talking about that in the coffee before we started this session, is, and we're here today, all of us, the online and the on-site people, is about this idea of recovering public space, right? Going back into the public space and recovering it as a part of our social experience. We know that if we leave public spaces empty, they will always be occupied. So the quality of the occupation, in the sense that if it's something that contributes and to builds up to social well-being, or if it's a space of crime, or worse than crime, in a certain sense, anomie, of just absence of people, and well-being is also one of our big challenges right now. And this idea of belonging to something, and here in this study they also talk about this idea of designing products and services, and it has also to do with our sense of belonging, because we also have to see everybody as an integral part. We can't, what I'm trying to say is that we can't divide the people that consume culture from people that produce culture, in a certain sense also. So that's one of the big challenges that we're going to have now, and we'll talk about that. But also, we can't be always separating the person that buys the ticket for a very specific exhibition from the person that's buying his or her boots of a certain brand, or eats in a certain way. We're whole people, right? And the way that we buy and we consume things is highly symbolic always. So if we really start to see our consumers as a whole entity that has several interests during their day and their weeks and their months and their lives, we can also tackle that as cultural producers or programmers. When we're talking also about this idea of cultural entrepreneurship and the business models and the type of people with whom we work, we also have a big challenge in the cultural and creative sectors, because we really have to include not only the not-for-profit traditional organizations, but we also have to consider the profit-making organizations, because in the last years, that line has become more and more tenuous. I don't know what your experience, for example, my company is a company, it's a for-profit company that we created in '99, because at the time we thought, me and my business partner, that we wanted to make a statement about the nature of the company. Like, we want to live from this, and it was about that. We didn't want to have a not-for-profit, and we didn't want to mix the activism with the consultancy or whatever we were going to make. We really want to say, this is our profession. We want to make our lives from this. But the reality is that more or less in 2009, we created our first nonprofit, because we wanted to have a place of experiment and support. And that nonprofit has been our channel to develop very specific artistic projects that promote social inclusion. It's the house or the home, if you want to define it, for our deaf choir that we support. And it's a project that we were incubators. We helped them develop the concept of a deaf choir. We stabilized the methodology, and it's been very, very interesting. And then in 2015, we created another nonprofit. That one linked to mediation and cultural entrepreneurship, because we wanted to have a space a little bit like this one that would promote this idea of working together, contaminating different areas. And we really felt that we had to have an organization for that one. And that one is growing now into being a full-fledged NGO for development, because our next plan for that nonprofit is going south, for the global south, and start to work in the Portuguese-speaking African countries about cultural arts and creativity, side by side with the NGOs that are talking about health and education, because we think that this is the moment where we can come in and really contribute from our European experience again. And it's about contributing in a mix from Portugal and also from the European experience. That's an important part of the perspective. And we could spend a whole morning talking about that idea, because it has also to do with this mission to go beyond the normal. We're not discussing colonialist themes or approaches when we're talking about that specific nonprofit. We're really talking about people helping people across the world and taking full advantage of a common heritage. Because besides all the, Portugal is a very old post-empire, right? We were an empire for 600 years, and we do have that history and those stories. But at the same time, you can go and go to India, to Goa. And in Goa, for example, the mix between the Portuguese and the European legacy and the Indian culture is so rich that it is a theme in itself. It's called Indo-Portuguese, because it's really a mix that only exists because of this interaction. And all across Africa, you also find, or Brazil, you find all these small relics or big relics of what was the Portuguese occupation for all those centuries. One of the, for example, a very prosaic thing. In Brazil, you have huge buildings like churches, usually governmental and religious power structures that are made from limestone and from marble that came from Portugal. But the reason why they arrived there in the first place was because the ships needed to have a weight to navigate, right? So they would go, because they would go empty, and so they would just put limestone and marble slates in, and then they would go across the Atlantic, and then they would unload that. And in the beginning, it was not considered like a valuable thing, right? Because it was just a way to give weight to the ships because of the navigation techniques. But then they realized that it was being valued by the local population. So it became this bilateral thing. And today you can find the marble and the limestone in the monuments in Lisbon, but you can also find them in Brazil. And I think that's one of the beauties of this world that we live in. You just find these relics all over. And of course, if you eat Portuguese cuisine, you'll find spices from all over the world, because that's how we were built as a culture from all these years. But going back to this, so this is what I'm trying to say, is this difference between for-profit and not-for-profit. Sometimes we should really forget about this capitalistic distinction. And it's funny because we do it in another business. For example, in the tech industry, the entrepreneurs are valued, right? Steve Jobs had a very good communications team. I won't talk about Elon Musk, but you know, we tend to value the people, and in culture we still have this, sometimes this preconception against people that are working in companies. And I think that more and more we really should create bridges between this, because usually when we define an entrepreneur, it's about a person that believes, and the studies have, or the research has showed over and over again, and this is cross-sectoral, that 60% of people that start a new business, they started because of an idea, not because of the money. It's about the idea, then it's about the quality of life, and then it's giving back to the community. Usually the money part is like the fourth or fifth reason that people talk about. And it's not about lingo, it's really what people feel. And in the cultural business, I think that most of us are entrepreneurs, even when we're working for other people, because there's a certain kind of profile that comes with creativity and comes with this option in life of working in the cultural sector, right? Stephen Hadley, some years. No, these are from research, so they are surveys. They don't come from the usual media.
Saying that entrepreneurs don't, they talk about their stories, about their...
Yeah, but I was talking about research results. It was about surveys that they do in so this data I'm talking about, it's not about asking Elon Musk if he values money.
But it doesn't matter who. But even if it came out in the research that these are the things that come most on the first, on the forefront of all the entrepreneurs' ventures, the reason behind it is questionable. Like
the reason, I really think that the reason behind, when I'm talking about money coming in fourth or fifth, is that most entrepreneurs would win more money working for third parties, for the companies. You, for example, an entrepreneur, I'm not going to go into the tech industry, just to give a basic example, you can win a load of money as being an engineer or working at I'm trying to remember the name. Well, working for Apple in their special division about, imagine...
But that's still very competitive. It's very hard to get in.
It is.
So it might be easier to find an idea that kind of holds water, get some investment sell the story, and that's what most of the startups were. It was just an industry of milking money out.
Yeah. So let's go beyond the tech industry.
Yeah.
And go back to our poor sector.
Yeah, but when we're talking...
Yes, but the research really shows there are several stereotypes that we have about entrepreneurs, and I'm really going cross-sectoral here, okay? From tech to culture to science, again. And there are certain stereotypes that we have. One is that entrepreneurs do it for the money. And the research shows over and over again that usually the trigger is not money. It's about an idea. It's about a mission. That's why they take the risk. The other stereotype that comes a lot is that entrepreneurs like to take risks. They're like risk junkies. You know, like people that really like
If it wouldn't be about the money, then it would be a risk. But if you have already investment lining up,
it's not about the risk, because usually
yeah, that's what I'm saying. If it wouldn't be about the money, then it would be risk. But because they know it's not a risk, and they have secured some funding beforehand.
But they haven't. A lot of times they don't have secured any funding. It's really about that. The research shows...
I mean, most Kickstarter campaigns that were successful already had 2/3 of it funded.
But
that's the business model.
Yes, but you're focusing a lot in the tech sector. No,
Well, Kickstarter is not only tech.
Of course, it's not only tech, and I was saying that. So usually Kickstarter is a crowdfunding mechanism.
Well, I was more focusing in the general idea of crowdfunding and of startups.
Yes,
on the whole environment that we create.
I know, but it's a small part of the entrepreneurial tissue. And again, the stereotypes. Usually people start a business with some money, but they start a business with some money because it takes us to our third stereotype about entrepreneurs. So the first one is that it's all about money. It's not. It's really not. It's about the ideas and missions. The second one is that entrepreneurs are risk-taking people. Usually they're not.
Yeah.
They have the calculated risk. They have to balance that because there's a lot online. And the third one is that entrepreneurs are young people. And the thing is that the most successful startups in all sectors, including ours, the leading person is usually older than 40, 45, because it brings in their experience and their network. And then, you're right, they don't start from nothing because they start from a wealth of experience and connections. But what leads a person when they're 45 to start their own business, right? And it's usually at that point about a big life-changing decision. They could have been fired. It happens. But usually it's also about, this is the time in my life that I'm going to have to start doing something that I think should be done this way. So it's a mix of things. But, and again, this is research. It comes from anonymous surveys. It comes from focus groups. It's not about Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or whatever, the tech guys saying that they're very good people. And that they're brilliant people, right? This week we had this major breakthrough that was Amazon workers' first union. So it's not the kind of world that I think that cultural people usually are dealing with. So entrepreneur, and I would even bring another word into the mix. Entrepreneur, do you know the name? Entrepreneur, so we have the entrepreneur, the usual. And then we have intrapreneur. That's also being used a lot because of people that are very, very active within their own organizations. They work for others, they work in a company, but they are highly entrepreneurial inside that organization, and they bring innovation and they bring new projects in. So I think it's about the mindset and the way of making things work.
I was around this culture for a while. I know how it works, kind of. And most of the young people that are not well set, they're just trying to make a buck. Like it was a business model. So you try to make a venture. You try to make a venture. You secured some funding, and then you try to go from there. Mm-hmm. So, like when I was at the university, there was a lot of this going on. It was still very hot. It was not dying out.
What do you do today?
Well, I work on, how do you call it, on European projects and stuff like that. Okay. I mean, I do many things, but let's say that's the money bringer.
Okay. So you're an entrepreneur?
No.
No.
No. But when I was at the university, and there was like, they were cultivating this culture of startups and all of this, and I remember how it was at that point.
But there was, in the last 10 years, there was, from the government policies point of view, a clear support for entrepreneurship and startup culture, even in schools with the business education. And there's also a discussion in the research if people are born entrepreneurs or if they are educated to be entrepreneurs. And that's not a very, it's not, we don't have the science for that, we don't know. Because there are some kind of personality traits that really enables us to develop projects and to connect with others and to start new ideas and to take the risks that are needed for that. But we also have but we also know that certain kinds of skills should be trained. For example, one of the things that's a recurring theme when we're talking about the cultural and creative sectors is about business skills for artists and cultural professionals. It's lacking constantly. And when we're talking about a sector, I have this text, it's a lot of text, but I'll just go quickly through it. But it has to do with this. Many of the cultural and creative companies or projects fail because the people that are behind them in the cultural and creative sectors don't have the skill set to manage a business, because we're academically trained to be an artist or an art historian or a cultural profession, but we don't know how, for example, how to organize our selling points, or we don't know how to manage our money in an administrative or in a tax-wise way. And that's over and over. There's a very interesting project, for example, in the UK, it's called the Space Studios. They've been going on for the last, I think it's a 50-year project right now, so 50 years. And what they do is they rent out space for artists to work in, and they promote residencies and that kind of stuff, but they also give very specific training and support in these fields of financial management, brand management, and of course, over the years, it's something that has already, it's an organization that's 50 years old, but in the last years, of course, they started to invest also in social media, internet management, that kind of stuff. And it's very interesting because you go in to those kind of skills to try to empower people so they can pursue what they are very good at. So what happens in this, and I put this information in because I think it's very important from when we think about projects, when we think about project design, because usually we're talking with people that have this kind of profile. So many professionals in the creative and cultural sectors combine several jobs to do a living, right? So, for example, I have my company, but I also teach at the Higher Education Institute. I also work as a freelancer to have translation or research jobs. So we all do different things. And we also have a career that is many times project-based. A little bit like people that work in science and research, that they also move from funding to funding. We also have that kind of flow. And that's a very difficult flow sometimes to manage by ourselves, in the sense that if, imagine for like 5 years, we're funded to develop a specific topic, then sometimes we have to change our focus because we don't have funding for that, or because we have a different opportunity. And that's something that is a problem for the sector when you're talking about generating expertise about specific themes. And one of the advantages that they're talking again and again, and that also has to do with the government support schemes, is that artists and cultural professionals are used to go from job to job, project from project, and we have this skill set that we could show to the other sectors of economy, how to have a career that is composed from different jobs or even from different career paths. But it's kind of a perverse way of seeing it, because it's many times it's not an option for us, it's just how things are. And finally, the idea that many of us are all self-employed or have micro companies, very small companies, with a very fragile financial structure, or we work overlapping all these different identities and all these different demands. So we work for others, then we have projects where we are working for ourselves, and then sometimes we have our own micro company. And the big challenge right now is that the natural step that we're all living now is digitization. The recovery and resilience plans post-COVID are focusing heavily on this. It isn't only related with the idea that we're all shut, locked down at home, in homes, living our lives through the digital means. It's really a revolution, and that will also bring new challenges for cultural and creative professionals, because suddenly the cost of entry for your own project will become higher, or will become more demanding from the part of workload related with the digital dimension of a project. So these are very difficult challenges that we're living right now. Does anybody want to, I have things in the chat happening. Okay, the thing in the chat is in Slovenian, so I don't understand. Oh, yes, yes, yes. Okay, I was very happy with the chat, and then suddenly I had this language barrier. So the other thing is that in the cultural sector, we work with intangibles. We work with our own knowledge and sensitivities, right? So that's another thing, because we're really taking risks from the artistic and the cultural part, because we're sharing our knowledge, and we're also sharing over and over again. If you're an artist, you're sharing a very personal viewpoint, and that's a challenging part of being entrepreneurial or putting yourself out there when you want to build projects, because it's like you're taking more risks. It's different if you would be selling bananas, for example, or selling your ideas. It has a level of intangibility that also increases your risk when you're developing projects. And that we're going to talk about that. So what really happens when we're talking about European projects? So what's our experience? And I'm going to share with you some stories from, as I said, my personal experience. So, and I'm going to talk about 𝑚𝑎𝑙𝑎 from that point of view. So when we created the company in 1999, we were two young women. We were both from a social sciences background, and we knew from our experience, we had both worked at Expo 98 in Lisbon, so the big universal expo, as team leaders. And the recruitment strategy for the team leaders in Expo 98 was they wanted student union leaders. So that was and that's interesting when you think about big events. So in Expo 98, they pinpointed that they wanted to recruit a lot of young people, of course, and they wanted to recruit people that had a profile from youth leaders, student union leaders, even from the Catholic movements. So young people that had these leadership profiles to be team leaders during the Expo 98. And that was our basic profile. My business partner, she comes from the Catholic youth movement, and I come from I was recruited because I came from the student union movement. It was there that I met Ilídio, my husband, and also one of my business partners today. So it worked. And we were recruited for that. So they really went for like what they would have the perception of having intrinsic skills, right? Like these people are the people that move on. So we had Expo 98, it ended. It was like this out of the planet experience, a little bit like the ECOC. It's like this very specific moment that you live as a society, and at that point, even as a country, because it changed how Lisbon's relation with that part of the city. It's considered one of the most successful urban renewals in an expo history. And the rhythm of the events and the audience is so high that you really have this idea almost like moonwalking. You really think that you're having an out of the planet experience. So it ended, I was 25, Anna was 27, and we really felt that cultural heritage and museums were losing over and over again the opportunity to engage with their audiences, and also to create civic participation, because our pre-assumption, and this has a lot to do with our training as sociologists, of course, was the more each of us knows about their environment, the more knowledge frees us in a certain sense and gives us power. And that was our goal, was to create these interfaces between the cultural heritage and the audiences, so people would feel empowered and have better quality of life. So that's what we started to do. We started to work a lot with teachers and schools because that was the main trend. Then at a certain point, we understood that many of the people that were working in museums were lacking people skills, because most people come from history or arts or are biologists, but they don't have social sciences training, this idea of communicating with people. I'm always sharing this anecdote, but it's a very specific one. Like when you receive a group of 5-year-olds at a museum, and you're talking about a history museum, it's not enough to say a long, long, long time ago, prehistorical men were wandering around, or the Crusades, because for the children, it will be, they don't have the timeline concept that will only start to be established when they're 10-year-olds. And it's completely different of talking about the abstraction that the 15 or 16-year-old can do. That's the reason why we only start to dabble with philosophy in serious terms when they're 15 or 16, and everybody hates it, right? Because of the idea of the level of abstraction. But if we can train people in the museums and cultural heritage about what kind of 5-year-olds have as a perception, then we can enhance the 5-year-olds experience and also the museum mediators experience. So that was the beginning of our journey in capacity building. Start to talk about very specific things and bring in the knowledge, the research that comes from sociology, anthropology, social psychology into that sector. For example, another anecdote over and over again, and I'll be talking about that also, and it derives from the kind of benchmarking that we do. You know what benchmarking is? It's a very marketerial term. Benchmarking is when we are looking at what our competition is doing to learn from them. Okay, so, and typically that's a thing that we do, and we usually mix that with web surfing. Google is a great benchmarking tool, so we just go around and see what the others are doing, and then we adapt. But the thing is, sometimes we're reproducing what could be small mistakes, or the starting point is not the most correct, and I'm going to share a story about that. And sometimes we don't understand the framework for that specific project. Typical thing that also happens, I was talking about the 5-year-olds, and for example, for the 5-year-olds, a typical thing that we do is bring in daily tools. For example, if I want to talk about weight, I'll bring in a kilo of sugar or flour. I remember an activity that we had that talked about the, I don't know how it's called in English. Como é que se diz cachalote? Well, you know the white whale that is white, but it's not a huge whale, it's a smaller whale. It's a typical mammal, and each tooth weighs a kilo. So when you're talking about this kind of mammal in a National Geographic exhibition with kids, and you say, oh, they have, I don't remember how many dozen teeth they have, a lot of teeth, and they go, whoa. And then you said, and each teeth weighs a kilo. And if you say with emphasis as a grown-up, they will go along. But if you give them a package of 1 kilo sugar, and you say, that's a tooth, you can see the moment that their brain makes the connection. So that's a very interesting thing when we're working with the kids. And when we're working in a completely opposite with the senior citizens, because of the benchmarking, we see over and over again that many cultural organizations go and ask them, let's talk about your past, your life story. And the thing is that research, especially the research that has to do with aging, what shows us that everybody, until the moment they die, are looking forward for the future. They don't want to reminisce over and over again about their past, or about they were growing up in the poor countryside or whatever. People want to learn and to be active until the day they die. And if they don't, then we have a mental health issue, and that should also be tackled. So, and more than ever, we find senior people projects that have to do with this fixation from us about the past because they come from this bad benchmarking. Just go and check what everybody's doing. And I think that many projects started because they had a good reason. For example, if you work with dementia, the older memories are the most stabilized, and sometimes we start from there. But if we're working with very active and open senior people, maybe we should talk about digital skills, what they're going to do tomorrow, even talk about climate change and how they're going to work with their grandchildren or whatever. So that's what we were working, and we started to work in capacity building. And we're talking about 2005, 2006. And so we started to do, we had our side-by-side, our projects, making games, creating projects, websites, exhibitions for the museums and the cultural heritage sector. And at the same time, we were building research and capacity building programs. And at a certain point, and that's a very important part of this story, in 2010, we had a meeting with a person from a municipality that worked in a museum. And he worked as our friend, now at the back of the room, in European funding. That was what our friend did. So, and we met because we had a project for his municipality. And after spending an afternoon talking about everything that we could do, he told us very simply, you have to go European. The wealth of knowledge that you have should be what we talked about in 2010, should be transferred, should be, and that was, at the time we had the Leonardo da Vinci framework and the Erasmus program, and it was about the idea of exporting innovation. So sometimes we have these jargon or the way that we talk about these things, like exporting innovation, and we think this is not for the cultural sector. But so, no, it's right for that. You have this wealth of knowledge about museum mediation, about creating connections with people, about joining the artistic and the creative process. For example, one of the things that we always do when we develop activities for adults, such as you guys, is that we always have a hands-on experience. So if I make a visit to an exhibition, and like imagine, had one that was about propaganda in the dictatorship, a really heavy subject, as you can imagine. And at the end, we had a big box full of nail polish, the cheap version, because it dries very, very quickly, and it already has a pencil attached, right? So it's a perfect medium. And we made people paint small objects. And the adults would bring this token home, because adults also need to have hands-on experience. And we've been very intellectualized about that, right? It's like we go in, we have these serious conversations about propaganda and dictatorship, and you can imagine that in Portugal, it's a heavy burden. As I imagine your recent history is also here, so it's a very difficult topic to deal with. And then at the end, people would just have this box, like, I think we bought like 80 different we just went around all the cheap drugstores that we had and bought everything that we had, even the ones with purpurinas, with brilliant stuff, you know, everything that we could put our hand, we just bought it. And then we have these small, very typical Portuguese objects that people would just paint, and then suddenly they would have a keychain or something for the Christmas tree. And it was so much fun. And when we went back a month after, we sent a survey to those participants, and we asked what they were what was the level of experience. They were very, very happy. And they said that they had felt that the activity had created a safe place to discuss difficult topics. And they really loved the hands-on experience, because many of them didn't draw or paint for many, many years, because something that we don't sing, we don't move, we're adults, we're very serious people, right? So this went on. So going back to the topic. So we went European. So what did we do? So our friend, he said that we were capable, and we decided to write an application for an Erasmus project. We had never done anything like that. And of course, because we were quite naive, we were coordinators in our first European project, and we failed the first application. So I don't remember how much we had, but maybe 79% or something like that. And we received this evaluation report. We learned about that, and we submitted the year after, because it's a sideline for the company. We don't depend on that. But we invested a lot of time, and we won. So our first European project was called Museum Mediators. I'll show it to you in a little while. Was 280,000 budget with 5 partners. And the national agency at the time told us, well, you have a very small budget as a company. We were very small at the time. You have no experience in European funded projects, none. So we're very worried about the idea of giving you 50% of 280,000 euro. We're talking about, this was 2012. So what we'll do is we'll give you small installments. We'll pay you in installments of 25,000 euro. And you'll have to do reports for each 25,000 euro installment, financial, etc. And we'll do the project. And we said, okay, let's. And again, I must underline that we were very naive about everything, about the work that it really entailed, about the project. But the fact is, the project worked. We had 5 audits, because nobody believed in our, I think neither did we. The audits really, instead of building stress, the first one did, or the second one, but then it built us confidence, because the auditor would come in and they would go through everything. But the main thing about that project, I'm just going to stop sharing this for a little bit, and I'm just going to go. We still pay the website, because museum. So this is the project. Now the website wouldn't work, that would be funny. Okay. So this is our project, Museum Mediators, 2012-2014. The one I was talking about, the first one we did. And what was the idea? We had created this training structure after all these questions about children and seniors and project management and everything. And we had this training course that we did 5 or 6 times in Portugal, okay? And we really had it stabilized, like this is what works. And the idea was that everybody that works with audiences in a museum, what they do have to know about the audiences, despite the kind of museum. It can work for a contemporary arts museum, for a natural history museum, for ethnographic museum. What kind of skills does that person that is in contact with the audience has to have? The other thing was, how can we value these people, that work in the educational sector, in cultural organizations, that are over and over again undervalued within the cultural organization? And with COVID, we learned that lesson again and again, right? They were the first to be fired. They're usually the freelancers, and their knowledge is not valued. Many times when you're doing even the cultural projects, like you're building the exhibition, and only at the end of creating the exhibition is that you think about the educational service people, instead of involving them as the people's representatives on the whole design. For example, if they can bring in certain details that are very important. Almost like we like to talk about when we're talking about the technological sector, about user experience. These are the people that usually know about the user experience. So that was the thing. So what we did was we wanted to see if the structure that we had designed for Portugal, if it made sense in other European countries, Italy, Denmark, Estonia, and Spain. So these were the other countries to which we transferred the innovation. And the first part of the project was doing a lot of research to see what components should be added on that didn't make sense at the first view for the Portuguese mediators, but made sense for others, and so on. So after creating the research structure, we did a training of more or less 150 museum professionals in these 5 countries. and we created a lot of, we collected case studies, we created a network, and we created publications with articles about the project. So it's a very typical, this should be working. Okay, so this is a very typical European project. It's a very traditional structure. It has research, then it has capacity building, and then it has outputs. And it's a very typical Erasmus plus today project also. So this was the first, and I wanted to share this with you because it's a way of seeing how you can go from having the knowledge and the capacity that works when you're working at a national basis, but it makes sense when you think about going European. So what happens many times is that you have all these people working in their separate projects, developing very interesting skills, having very interesting experiences, but there's a labyrinth of, that was what this image tried to convey, a labyrinth of barriers, and sometimes there are symbolic barriers also that really don't make people dialogue between them. And what we aim, even today when I'm talking with you, is that we want to go from this to this. This is a photo. Okay, it's not a very good photo, but for us it's a very important photo because this is a photo that we took 2 weeks ago in Orbital Theatre's stage. Orbital Theatre is in Copenhagen. They are one of the partners of our 𝑚𝑒𝑛𝑡𝑎 Plus project. It's a Creative Europe large cooperation partnership, so it's completely different from the Erasmus. And this project went from having all these people doing their own stuff in different parts to being all together, creating a marvelous thing, and taking this photo. And I can tell you that we were laughing and crying when we took this photo because it was, as you can imagine, 4 very, very intense years. And addressing this particular project, 𝑚𝑒𝑛𝑡𝑎 Plus, I can tell you that the partners, this is a project that is, as I said, a Creative Europe large cooperation project. It's from the previous program, so it has differences to the running program. It's a project that is 50% co-funded. So I can tell you from experience that we all invested more time and more energy than the actual funding that we had. But we learned so much, and that's an important part about working at European level. And it was an audience development project that started in 2018, in June, and everybody knows what happened in March 2020, right? When we were starting to have our audience development prototypes to be launched, everybody went into lockdown. But I can also tell you that this project gave us the knowledge and resilience to overcome all the many of the consequences of the COVID-19 lockdown, even in the relation that the artistic partners had with their audiences. And I'll go back to this project just to explain it, because I think it's a very interesting one from the point of view of the methodology. And in the afternoon, we will also work a little bit about this kind of methodology that comes from that. But I want to just go, before making a short break, to this idea: why do we go European? Why do we do it? And it gives us resilience and growth, but it's about innovation. We learn different things from each other. And we learn different things from organizations that are similar to us, because they simply come from different cultural backgrounds in different countries. And it's a very interesting way of putting what we do into perspective, and our values and our worldview, because different countries value different things. And it's very interesting how you deal with that. It offers you a steep learning curve, because as we know, we all say that we like to learn things, and we like to be out of our comfort zone, but it's a lie. That's a blatant lie. We don't. Usually, we need to be pushed to learn things, and we need to be pushed out of our comfort zone. Then we find it's quite nice and pleasant, and I'm learning new stuff, but we need that push. And when we work in European projects, and I'm talking about all this very wide spectrum from Creative Europe, Erasmus, Horizon, small cooperation projects, whatever, we learn a lot, and we learn from what we could call today the soft skills, right? Listening, empathy, and that's so important, but we also learn a lot from the technical point of view, because suddenly we have access, we have this, again, a preconception that we have access to loads and loads of information today. But the thing is, we have access to loads and loads of information, basically in our national languages, or in English, or in French, or in the languages, the most common ones. But sometimes, when you're learning and working in a European project, suddenly you have access to this fabulous PhD or article or a project that is in Polish and would never go beyond the borders of the Polish language if there wasn't a European project that would translate and share with the others. And that's a learning opportunity, and so on. The other thing is about connection. It's about this idea of connecting with different people that go beyond your bubble. And I was putting there bursting bubbles and silos, because that's a very important part. Talking with people that are different from us, because sometimes we don't really see how we're talking about so much with people that are like us. We see it a lot in the language, right? My business partner's husband, he's a musician. He sings, he's an erudite singer. And sometimes he says that when me and Anna are talking, he doesn't understand a word, because we're using so much jargon that he really doesn't follow us. Of course, after almost 30 years, we would expect him to follow us, but that's it. But it happens, and if we can have this connection with others, it's really interesting to go out of our safe zone also. It's about empathy, about valuing what others value. If you see, for example, a very prosaic example. In my company, we use the WhatsApp a lot, and it's a small group, and it's a very horizontal. So if I want to have an agenda for a meeting or something, sometimes I just text through WhatsApp and say let's join up tomorrow to discuss that. And I did it in a European project, and one of my colleagues from another nationality told me, no, I like to receive things through email. I like to have a meeting agenda and a time frame, because that helps me to organize my day. And suddenly I realized you really have to go and think, okay, he's not being difficult. He's really saying what helps him, and let's do this, because, and the fact is, it helps. It gives an organization to the project that is different. But it's nice how you see that different types of people, and of course different nationalities also, because the cultural stereotypes, they exist for a reason, value different things, and we really connect through that. And that leads us to a daily exercise of democracy, because we're always talking about that when we want to talk about cultural participation. And now everybody's quite obsessed with the cultural democracy as the mainstream theme, and the European Bauhaus about this idea of intertwining co-creation and participation in cultural production. But the fact is that many cultural organizations are not democratic organizations. They're very vertical, they're highly hierarchical, and they don't work within themselves in a democratic way. And they're quite close to the world. And you have to see, I work a lot with cultural heritage and museums. And cultural heritage, the monuments, the palaces, the museums are really very they're the most tangible artifacts that we have, right? And that gives them also, sometimes they're very closed to this idea of how can we work with our audiences in co-creation or participation. So democracy, as we have to work in a project where we don't have a supplier chain. It's not about having people that work for us. It's about having people that work with us in a peer level, really also helps us to think in a different form and to be more innovative. It helps us take more risks. And this idea of bursting bubbles and silos, I started the talk by telling you about a health project with Culture Action Europe. The idea of having people that come from the medical profession working side by side with people that come from the arts and the cultural sectors. And suddenly you're connecting and talking about that. We are right now developing an application for crafts. And we were discussing, for example, how, again, I'm going back to the medical profession, but I could go to NASA, where they used the women that do that intricate embroidery with only one needle. In Portugal, we call it crochet. Whatever. So in NASA, they used that for the first rocket ships, because it was a way of intertwining the electronics of the ship. And in medicine, in the medical profession, there's a famous heart surgeon that created a thing that stops heart things, because it works like a very small net. And he hired artisans to create these microscopic things that he just injects, because the knowledge is there. So we're talking about going way beyond what would be the normal bubbles or silos. And then the idea of bringing new agendas, because if we learn more things, or we're in connection with other people, we also learn about other urgencies. We have a project right now that we got the funding through the EEA grants, Iceland, Liechtenstein, Norway, and we're talking about climate change in the interior of Portugal. In Portugal, the summer fires have become a huge catastrophe, and it's an annual event. And some years ago, we had a really hard summer where 100 people died in a single road trying to flee forest fire. And you can imagine this was a huge national trauma, because we failed them. But it was also, so we're working with that region specifically. It's 5 municipalities, and we're talking about climate change and the changes in landscape through arts and culture. And we're working side by side with the Icelandic University and the Bridges UNESCO project, because they bring their experience from the glacier melting and the way that the people in Iceland are dealing with also this drastic transformation of their landscape. So it's like a fire and ice saga. The activity is really called Fire and Ice. It's like Game of Thrones, but Portuguese Iceland version. And this idea of talking about climate change, and we have like forest engineers working with the musicians, talking about sound, but also about arts, talking with the schools and the teachers. So these kind of projects are very interesting, and they bring new agendas, or they make us believe that we're capable of dealing with new agendas also. They empower us. And finally, and I've talked about that, the idea of having different sectors working together. And different sectors working together, I'm not only talking about health or forests, engineers working with people from arts and culture. I'm talking about the 𝑚𝑒𝑑𝑧 project, where we put museum people. And I think for 𝑀APA it was a qualitative transformation, working with people from the performing arts, because these are different sectors. It's not like we can't put everybody under this umbrella of creative and cultural center sectors, because digital artists are different from musicians and are different from museum professionals. And we can't just put like a label and we're all alike. We're very different, and we can learn so much from each other. and have an interesting relation with our shared audience. So I'll just leave this and we can make like a 10-minute break. So I was talking, and I'm sorry for talking too much, but that's why they brought me. And please interrupt if you have any more questions. I'm going to show you a small project about the 𝑘𝑢𝑙𝑡𝑢𝑟𝑛𝑒𝑔𝑎 project. It's a Creative Europe large cooperation project. And I think it can be a good example of the things that we can do. Just to contextualize the project in very broad terms, it has 15 partners, and it joins what we call research partners. So these are organizations as 𝑚𝑎𝑝𝑙𝑎 das Ideias, as CKI, as Cultura Nova in Zagreb, that are smaller organizations, more agile and more focused on research and consultancy. And these are the research partners, okay? Then we have what we call the artistic partners. And again, I was talking about the learning curves, and the evolution of the 𝑘𝑢𝑙𝑡𝑢𝑟𝑛𝑒𝑔𝑎 project has a lot to do with this idea of working together. When we launched our Museum Mediators project between 2012 and 2014, the first 𝑘𝑢𝑙𝑡𝑢𝑟𝑛𝑒𝑔𝑎 team started to work in the first 𝑘𝑢𝑙𝑡𝑢𝑟𝑛𝑒𝑔𝑎 version that started in 2013 and went to 2015. And we actually met 𝑚APA and those founding members of the 𝑘𝑢𝑙𝑡𝑢𝑟𝑛𝑒𝑔𝑎 to they invited us to come in, a little bit like today, as experts to talk about our experience with the museum mediation. And from there, we started to work together in another project. But the same thing happened with the Museum Mediators project and the 𝑘𝑢𝑙𝑡𝑢𝑟𝑛𝑒𝑔𝑎, the first version of the 𝑘𝑢𝑙𝑡𝑢𝑟𝑛𝑒𝑔𝑎. We developed, as I was explaining, research. We created a training toolkit. We did it over and over again in different countries. The first 𝑘𝑢𝑙𝑡𝑢𝑟𝑛𝑒𝑔𝑎 also had a very interesting difference towards our own. We were doing training for a week, and then the people were left, so to speak. They had all the materials, and then we would go back like 2 months after to do a survey. But in the 𝑘𝑢𝑙𝑡𝑢𝑟𝑛𝑒𝑔𝑎, this first generation, they were doing an interesting thing. They were giving the training, but then they had like a mentorship program going on for 6 months to see how the person would replicate or would embed that new knowledge in their organization. And this is interesting because there's always slight tweaks that we can do in the projects, and they bring interesting things. But both projects failed in one part. What we felt was, in the first 𝑘𝑢𝑙𝑡𝑢𝑟𝑛𝑒𝑔𝑎 and in the Museum Mediators project, we trained one person, 2 people at maximum per organization. The people would feel very excited, empowered, subversive, like guerrilla people. And then they would go back to their organizations. They would be like that for like a month, 2 months, 3 months, and then the organization would kill the virus. Daily life would bring people back to the status quo. And that was really frustrating for us, because suddenly what we felt was that, and that had a repercussion, for example, in the Museum Mediators project, in the network, because we had a network of about 120 professionals, and the network didn't survive as an effort this kind of the daily life. And for Museum Mediators, the 𝑘𝑢𝑙𝑡𝑢𝑟𝑛𝑒𝑔𝑎 project was working a lot with people that had stable jobs within the organizations, because they were working the marketing and communications departments. But in our case, with the Museum Mediators, since most of our professionals were freelancers, we really felt that they were, the project had made them, in a certain sense, it seems arrogant, I don't want to seem arrogant, but like make them dream and connect and think about different possibilities. And suddenly you go, and a year after, there's nothing of the project because you didn't manage to viralize. And of course, I'm being very dramatic here, because today we still have offspring projects from that experience. But the idea of, if you work only with one individual in the organization, it's really hard, unless you're COVID-19, to viralize, to make it an epidemic in the organization. You really want to change. So what happened was, when we did the second generation 𝑘𝑢𝑙𝑡𝑢𝑟𝑛𝑒𝑔𝑎 Plus, and it was done by stages. They first did a connecting audiences project that was done through Erasmus Plus. So they tried to bring in a new curricula for university, and they created like a small master's about audience development. That consortium still, so you see, they first made the first project was also an Erasmus Plus, then they went for an Erasmus. The first was an Erasmus, then they went for an Erasmus Plus, and then we went for a Creative Europe grant. And why did we do that? Because we changed the methodology. We were worried about the legacy of the project. So we built a project where we didn't have one person that came to have training. We built a project where we had the research partners, the people that had this agility to think about the big research and the themes and the training. And it's not sometimes about the skill set only, it's about the size of the organization or the nature of the organization. And we worked not with one person from an artistic organization, we worked with the artistic partners as a whole. So the project had research partners and they had artistic partners that when they came into the project, they said, we want to go through the whole process with you guys as an entire organization. And the goal of the project was to enable organizational change, making these artistic organizations more democratic, more open to their audiences, learning more about their audiences. In the last conference, we said that we're going from audiences to people, because that's the thing. We sometimes go for the numbers, and it's not about that. It's about really understanding the people that are our fans, are our friends. And the whole organization undertook the 𝑘𝑢𝑙𝑡𝑢𝑟𝑛𝑒𝑔𝑎 methodology and developed an audience prototype. So the idea was, this idea of audience was to create a program that was based on the principles. So this enabled to involve many people from the organization, and the 𝑘𝑢𝑙𝑡𝑢𝑟𝑛𝑒𝑔𝑎 methodology is about joining in the same room people, for example, in a museum, the person that sells the tickets, the person that is in conservation of the collection management, but also the people from education and the CEO and the marketing people. And through a series of workshops that have very specific moments following visual thinking. So it's not like we invented, innovation is not about inventing everything, it's about learning from other sectors and bringing it in, right? Through these workshops, this group of people, this person that's selling the ticket that suddenly can talk peer-to-peer, because we have all these dynamics and exercises with the CEO, they develop together. First, they identify a problem. A common problem. So first they build a common ground, then they identify a problem, and then they create a prototype of program to try to solve the problem. And then they test it. And if it works, they embed it into the program. And what we expect is, by this exercise, by this demonstration of how it works, it changes the organization. Because suddenly people are talking with each other that usually don't talk, and they know each other. And it also shows that we can test and sometimes fail. So that's an important part of the project. This idea of creating a common ground, identifying a problem, creating a solution, testing the solution, and if it fails, okay, let's learn from the failure and try again. Giving a very lateral example from the well-being project that Cultural Action Europe is involved in. And I'm sorry, because I didn't give that context, because besides 𝑀𝑎𝑙𝑎 das Ideias, I'm now the president of Cultural Action Europe. I'm a board member, and I was elected last summer as the chairperson for the board. So I'm pretty much involved, as you can imagine, in the daily routine of Cultural Action Europe, and it has been like really a roller coaster experience, because Cultural Action Europe has 180 members, and it's all across the cultural sector. So that's been a learning experience. But in that project, Cornelia was also telling me that one of the things that the neurologists said was that, as we know, the older memories are those that Alzheimer patients keep, right? They start to lose the recent memories. So they decided to make an experience, and they created a house of the past. And they were working with a specific age group, imagine people in their 70s. So they built a house that would be the house that they would have during their childhood. And they bought everything. They had a flat, an apartment, and they furnished it with all the furniture that was typical in that decade. They bought cereals and canned goods and everything that could be like the vintage stuff to reproduce the appliances. Everything was as they would have lived as children. And the house charges tickets. So the idea is that you can charge, and you go there as you would take your kids to go to a jumping thing or something, right? You spend money, or to go to the movies. This was a house where you go, and the Alzheimer sufferer goes with their caretaker. So they did this experience, and it didn't work. There was no real connection. So they went back to the research. And that was the part that we all thought was incredible, was they did the research and they understood that from the neurology science, the memories that are really structural memories, the one that really define the adult that we're going to be, are not the childhood memories, are the teenage years. The time in our lives that we start to separate from our parents. I have teenagers, so I know that pain. And you start to develop your own interests, and you start to define the adult you're going to be. And what did they do? They went back to the house and they changed everything to be more according to the teenage years, the early 20s. And that house worked. People would get very excited. They would remember stuff. They would go in and people with aphasia would say complete sentences, because the objects, this idea, I'm a museum person, right? So I'm always obsessed with the material, the tangibles. The objects would really provoke discussions. People that wouldn't talk about anything for months, suddenly they were talking about something, sometimes about painful memories, of course. And they would register for 6 weeks an increase in the serotonin levels and in the well-being of these patients. So they started to buy tickets regularly. But the thing in this project is, besides the simplicity of it, this idea, is the idea that they failed and they tried again. They didn't quit. And this is the project related with ADERST, but ADERST has a lot to do with this. One of the interesting things about the ADERST project also is that, as I told you, first we create a common ground and then we identify a common problem. But usually, of course, before we started the workshops, we've talked with the organization's directors, right, that bring us in, and I'm talking beyond the limits of the project. And usually the director will tell me what the problem is, right? You know that. Everybody, like, you go in and he says, oh, we have this big problem because this and this and that. And what happened was, the problem that was identified during the workshop was never the problem that the director had told us that would be for sure. This will be, you'll see, everybody will talk about not bringing funding into the museum. And then suddenly you're talking about young people. We want to, because we discovered that we never see people that are outside of the school age here at the museum. Or we want to talk about, for example, one of the experience that we did, and it's being implemented now, was with the libraries in a municipality in Portugal, where they lost the senior users because of COVID. People went home, and the library really had a very strong senior citizens use. They would go for the newspapers, they had spaces to play cards or just to be with each other. And with the COVID, people left, right? They are the most fragile people. And then another thing happened was 2 years when you're an older person, sometimes it's the difference between a healthy and active person and having to face health issues. So all this was the problem. And through a very unorthodox 𝑘𝑢𝑙𝑡𝑢𝑟𝑛𝑒𝑔𝑎 workshop, because it was during our summer school. So what we basically did was we brought in the people from the library, but then they had this classroom made of summer school participants from all across Europe in Zoom. They created this project about bringing the senior people in using plants, using their gardening skills as the medium. And through the gardening skills, they would create a library of plants, like a book shelves with their plants, where they could present their plants, take care of their plants, and they can also have digital skills education by using those apps that identify the plants' names, and then they could bring in their grandchildren to show them. So, and the project has started now. They've already bought the bookshelves, and they're now trying to bring people in. So this is a kind of things that we can create with a project like this. I'm going to share a video that explains. And then we also had policy partners, because one of the things we're talking about working at European level. So what we want to do with all this work is, we had the research partners, we had the artistic partners with this goal, and then we had what we call the policy partners that sometimes overlapped with the research partners or with the artistic partners, or were just policy partners. So we could make policies, we could talk the European Commission's jargon and also make change from their point of view. So, because sometimes we are doing this, for example, for us, one of our important victories of the beginning this year was that museum mediators, or cultural mediators in the latter sense, were finally recognized as an economical category, as a profession in our tax system, and it's European-wide. And that was a victory that came from years of lobbying, of discussing mediators as a profession, etc. So policies are an important part. So I'm just going to put the video.
Do you want to know what Adeste Plus is about? Why do we feel there is a need for the Adeste Plus project? Culture is not accessible enough, and cultural participation is a major challenge for Europe. Many claim the need for change, but how do we do that? How should we take responsibility and open up cultural organisations to new relations with citizens and communities? Firstly, we believe that changing the way we address cultural participation is a complex challenge, and complex challenges demand multiple perspectives. That is why the consortium is made up of artistic partners who take risks and try to test something new that might change them, and policy partners, which explore the policy frames that can help organisations to become more audience-centred. And finally, research partners, because change needs investigation and modelling to become replicable. But how do we do it? We research and ideate a methodology, the audience-centred experience design, to support cultural organisations. Then we run a set of workshops with the staff of our artistic partners to see if it works. After the capacity building based on this process, organisations prototype new creative programmes that they test with their audiences. Once tested, the capacity building becomes what we call a blueprint, a step-by-step methodology that others could apply. But does it work for others? To improve this blueprint, we test it on other cultural contexts. Finally, we share our learning with as many people as possible through conferences and summer schools. Now the blueprint belongs to everybody, but it is just a seed. It can grow and develop in diverse plants thanks to the contributions of others. Join us to discover and learn the 𝑖deste Plus audience-centered experience design blueprint to help cultural organisations create new relations with citizens and community.
This idea of sharing, so the 𝑖deste Plus project, 15 partners, 7 countries, and we are closing it now in April, so it's the last month of the project. And the funny part was we did the workshops during 2019, and then when the lockdown came, we were going to start these audience prototypes, and we had to adapt. But I really think that, and we did a lot of the program online, and then with the return to normalcy, the cascade programs were already done with in the field, so on site. And sometimes we're talking really about small tweaks. We're talking about, for example, discussing how we manage the recess in the theater, if we have one or not, if we have some kind of activity or consumers, for example, if we sell popcorn or alcoholic beverages in the recess and we turn the recess into a happening, or if we allow people to drink inside the theater or eat. As you know, that's a big taboo that has to be discussed. Or if we talk about classical music and people say that in the survey they stopped, they would go, but they can't because they have small children or other things. And then we try to create a program that really offers a side activity for the kids while the parents can go for an afternoon concert. That kind of stuff, being very, very attentive to our people, the segment of audiences. So usually when we think about a project, I just put some activities that sometimes go along. We're talking about capacity building and training activities. And when I'm talking about that, I'm talking from creating a framework and having the expert going in and teaching you, but I'm also talking about peer-to-peer learning, like just joining up, a very Nordic concept of the learning circles, for example. And for example, each of us just having the opportunity once a month of joining a group of cultural professionals and discussing a topic. Like once a month you bring in a speaker to talk about diversity or a specific case study, just to share their case study, and then you just discuss it and go home. And that will change or enrichen your experience. So when I'm talking about capacity building or training activities, it's a very wide net of possibilities. Dissemination events. We're talking here at the 𝑖deste Plus project about the summer school, because we really wanted to have, in the application we talked about that, we had summer schools and we had European conferences, and we really distinguished the nature of those events. Like the summer school, the idea is to be hands-on. It's really to have this classroom experience, being with colleagues. But dissemination events can be a peshakusha in the evening, can be a conference, can be an online thing, can be whatever you want. And then the projects can give rise also to exhibitions, performing arts events. They can be about advocacy, pure and simple research, or they can really focus a small community and be about inclusion and community building, or have, of course, a wider scope. So we have all these different dimensions that can come in when we think about a project activity. It doesn't have to be about one thing, it can be about several. And it can be about the most uncommon or activities that you can think about. You can think about an exhibition, for example, that is a traveling exhibition, but then it changes a little bit in each venue, or just or wins some kind of content, and when it reaches the final one, it's like this huge arc of Noah full of different references. It can be whatever you want. That's the beauty of when we're thinking about these kinds of projects. And of course, when I was talking about learning more, it also has to do with what we are willing to read outside of our comfort zone. I put here the Porto-Santo Charter because it's a very dear project to MAPA. We worked on that last year. And it was a document that was created during the Portuguese presidency of the European Council. And it's about this idea of cultural democracy applied to the cultural organizations, and this idea of transsectorial cooperation based on cultural participation, co-creation. The basis is that we are all cultural producers, and that we should value that as a society and also as a democratic exercise. It's an interesting document. And then I'm talking about also the Green Deal, the European Bauhaus, and the Cultural Deal. That was a document that was created by Cultural Action Europe, Europa Nostra, and the European Cultural Foundation to discuss how the cultural and creative sectors are a very valid answer for Europe's recovery post-COVID. And then there are all these white papers, the work plans, the action plans for very specific themes that worry the European Commission. And the interesting part is when you just dip in, and we're talking about they're not like huge documents, they're quite readable, you really see interesting pathways for us as cultural and creative professionals, how we can have learning opportunities and project opportunities. Sometimes we're talking about digital inclusion, or you're talking about gender equality, and it gives us a wider perspective of the work that we can do. So I wanted to just to underline that we have all these policy documents that are wandering around, and sometimes we never go and read them or discover them. And they give us very interesting indicators about the problems. And as you saw in the video about 𝑚𝑒𝑑𝑧 Plus, we started by identifying a problem, right? It was like, what is the problem? It's about this idea of opening organizations to their audiences, discovering the people. And then we developed a project from there, because that's an important thing. We have to identify a common problem. That would be the beginning. And the common problem can be, how do we talk about the prehistoric occupation of Europe as a continent? And how do we recognize the diversity of that kind of occupation? It doesn't have to be like this big social problem. It can be a very specific thematic problem, but we have to start from that. And then we have always this European framework to learn from. We have the networks, such as Cultural Action Europe. And for us as a small consultancy company, belonging to a network is really about networking and learning from the other members and having access to information that we wouldn't have in another sense. And another way of learning is going for the national desks. I put Motovila here, but you can go for the Erasmus, for the Horizon Europe. Just call or send an email to the national desks. And from my experience, these are people with a mission. So they will really answer to you, and they really will discuss the project with you. And sometimes we have these very strange ideas in our heads, or an intuition, like a very vague intuition. And these are the people that will sit with you for an hour and discuss that vague intuition, and then tell you, or let's go and change this and think about that. And maybe I can make a phone call or send an email, and maybe I can put you together with an Italian partner. Or I know some Hungarian guys that are doing a wonderful job in this field, or French, or whatever. Sometimes we can just go there with a hunch, like we had it with the museum mediators, right? We knew, or we felt that this idea of having professional guidelines for museum mediators was an important topic. But it was really important to have the national desk with us there. And then projects that that are recent in the European Commission's experience. I put here Amplify. Amplify is about this huge initiative about the future of Europe. And for the first time in its history, the European Commission really said that we want to go for the grassroots. We want to hear what the common citizens, the civil society, thinks about Europe and European values and the conditions. And this is probably also a consequence of what's happened in the last years, because the European Union has had very difficult times dealing with the refugee crisis, with big challenges that have to do with the core of democratic values sometimes, with the new authoritarian regimes. And I'm not even talking about the war in Ukraine, I'm talking beyond that, or it's something that, because the European Union has also recognized that they've been very focused on the economical and the technocratic development, and we need to go back for the grassroots to talk about people and about what the cultural sector can bring in. And the Amplify project is a contribution for this big debate about the future of Europe. But then we have other projects as the Voices of Culture, that is this idea of having structured dialogues with the organizations of the sector about specific themes. And if you go in, if you just write the Voices of Culture, you'll find reports that are produced integrally by cultural professionals about rural areas, about gender equality, about the sustainable goals for development. And it's really interesting because it's not only about the recommendations, but it's about the people and the organizations that were involved in that. Suddenly you have a map, like I want to do a project, I have a festival in a rural area and I want to grow or want to learn more about other experience. You go in and you can see the people that belong to that network. And then you can do the easy thing, that is just make a call or send an email. We, our closest friends or partners were all done in a conference or in a workshop where we just sat and said, I want to learn more about what you do. And we just built from there. That's something that grown-ups also don't do very easily. But when we were teenagers, we were experts, right? Making friends. That's a little bit about that. So this is our story, but I've talked about several projects. These are some of the projects that we've done. And let me just sec. Okay, so this is some of the things that I wanted to. So I've talked a lot about the general idea or how we do a project and how it went for us at Mapa das Ideias. And you're also silent, that I'm really feeling sorry for you guys. But now I wanted to talk a little bit about what we think when we want to create a project. And we have an exercise for you. So I'm just going to give you some random ideas that should be our pointers to think about that. So when we create a project, we should be really aware of this idea of having the fantastic, the next big idea, and what is our mission? What is the thing that we do really, really well? So it's this idea of what do we exist for as an organization or whatever, and what are the limits for an idea generation? If you have, for example, a very local-based activity, maybe you want to go European to learn more about that kind of methodology. You don't want to start a project where you have to increase your scope of action to a national level, because that's not where your resources are or your skill set. You want to work better locally. So it's this balance that we have to think when we're thinking about our mission and this idea generation. Or of course, you can also say, I've worked so well at the local level, now we want to go national. Two strategies that are perfectly reasonable, since if you know what you're doing, it has to be intentional, because suddenly you just go into the role and it won't work. The other one is what I was talking in the beginning of the morning about benchmarking and theoretical framework. Beware of benchmarking just per se. Try to discover why those decisions were made. best way of doing benchmark. Write the guys. If you see a good project on a website or you see a good video, write them, send an email, ask more about the project. Now with the Zoom and the digital tools, we can just have a Zoom to talk for 1 hour with that person and try to discover why that project came to life and what is the theoretical framework. Why are they doing that? Because sometimes we discover some barriers, we discover interesting stuff that we can really use to our project. Then this very difficult balance between arts and culture and commerce. We can have both in several projects because, as I was also saying in the beginning of the morning, we all are consumers. And sometimes we can bring in that dimension as part of our cultural experience with the merchandising, with the food experience. And maybe we shouldn't create these very such an evident and foolproof division. And I can again share our personal experience because as I told you in the history of MAP, I was talking about our story. So in 2010, we went European, and suddenly we arrived to 2013, 2014. And one of the subjects that I teach is marketing. And one of the things that was really bothering me when I went to all those European museums and in Portugal was also that I felt that the museum shops were a lost opportunity for audience engagement, to tell the story of the museum on one hand, like objects that would be more about storytelling, and also objects that would have an ethical dimension, because I really felt that museums, as the guardians of the objects, really should fight for an ethical dimension in the products that they sell in the store. And we started to discuss this at MAPA. We developed a brand called Oceanos, because Oceanos is a very Portuguese reality. We have this beautiful saying that in Portugal, our language is made of the sea, right? Because we are a seafarer country. We have the biggest national, I never know how it's called, sea region, yeah, economical area. It's bigger than the continental Portugal, and we have this deep relation with the sea, right? So for us, the brand would be called Oceanos, and it's a very easy word to say in French and in English and in Spanish. It's a very international word. And it was about exporting arts and crafts, Portuguese arts and crafts, for very small suppliers, very small companies, to support the startups that were made from design and everything, and exporting them for very personalized products in European museum shops. So that was the idea of the project. And of course, as we are museum mediators, we didn't create a normal catalog, we created a game. The catalog was made of cards that people could make like collections, because the cards would emulate the idea of organizing it. And we created training materials, we did the whole thing, because the idea was to have it like a side job for Portuguese that were living abroad, they could use it. And we failed spectacularly. It never took off. We spent, I don't know, loads of time, money, the catalog, everything, and it didn't take off. But then we decided that we wanted to try to go the real deal, and we applied to be a museum, for a museum shop, to manage a museum shop. And that museum shop came with an add-on. To manage the museum shop, we had to manage the restaurant. And we said, why not? That's so easy. Of course, it's not easy. But we've been doing it for the last 8 years. So we have this thin line between arts and culture and commerce. We have 200 suppliers at the museum shop. Today we have 2 museum shops. And for example, this is at the Maritime Museum in Lisbon. It's the Maritime Museum belongs to the Portuguese Navy. So it's a military museum, and it's been a fantastic work partnership relation in these late 8 years, where we've had everything, including the pandemics, right? And one of the things that we've done, for example, is that we have this fantastic carrot and ginger cake. And the idea is that we have this carrot and ginger cake because it's storytelling, right? Because it's the European carrot and the ginger that came from the Far East. And when they sell the chocolate cake, that is also very good, we talk about Central America. So we're always talking about that. And the museum shop has 200 suppliers, and 90% are micro companies that come from Portugal or the Iberian Peninsula, and that have very short supply chains. And one of the things that we were doing when the lockdown started was try to change the packaging. So working side by side with our suppliers, because it's a very close relation, to drop the plastics out of the... So it's this kind of small project. So the Fin line, and basically what we're doing is selling magnets and selling postcards and selling cappuccinos in one of the most touristical areas of Lisbon, and making a lot of money from that. But we know that people are really happy. And when they go out, and we talked about the carrot and ginger cake, and talked about that, they will make the connection. That's a very important part. Another thing, competition versus collaboration. We've always done from the first, I think that this is an ideological point. When Ilídio will launch the English version of the website, you'll be ready to read our manifesto. We have a political manifesto about this idea of cultural democracy and participation. And one of the things that we did from the first point was we fostered collaboration and not competition. Some of our biggest competitors are our partners. They work together with us. And sometimes, and it's not about this idyllic version of the world, it's just that if we have more companies as MAPA, we'll have a stronger sector, because we'll have more people talking about this, more money will come in, more funding, and more quality in the work. So that's a good thing for us. So we've been, in a certain sense, an incubator for new projects, for different projects, working side by side with competitors. And then the other thing is, we really have to collaborate with each other to improve our own skill set. And it's really worked as a way of line. And the thing is, when we're working in the cultural sector, even in European funding, the budgets are so small for the number of competitors that it's really easy just to step into the idea of, I'm in a very competitive field, I'm just going to be locked down in what I do, and I'm not going to share these intangible resources that I have, my ideas, my creativity, with no one. And we've learned over and over again that it's very, very important to share, yes, just to sit and I want to learn from you. I do this, what do you do? And just go about. And this idea also takes us to the last point of these pointers, that is advocacy versus business. They don't have to be separate, because we're whole people. And for me, I believe, as I believed when I was 20 or 25, that civic participation makes a better society. That the strength of democracy is in each of us as a citizen, the people that don't litter the floor, that will take some time to help one another, that will go to a school to give a small lecture if invited, or will just paint a postcard or whatever. Each of us has a role to do. And if each of us does, that's what and that's what we bring into MAPA and what we do as a cultural organization. So, and this is business, this is the way, because I'm a whole person, right? I can't work 60 hours a week and then just do Netflix or whatever the rest of the time. So we're whole people. And the people that also use our organizations, that are our users, that really, they also are whole people. And this all comes into a blend. And I think that there's been a temptation to do the guru stuff, right? Just make people be bidimensional and just put people, for example, for earning and academic level, and just classify people like that. And we know today that that's completely wrong. We're more complex than that. And we can try to shy away from that complexity. It's too much data to manage, but there are tools that are very interesting that can help us manage that. And then and then we'll go for the exercise. So I'll shut up. Last thing, think beyond the roles. We're trying to think about professional roles. We go and we put the director, the educator, the technical person, the visitor, and we tend to put people into boxes and to think about them about that. Think about what people love and start with yourselves. Because sometimes you find in the things that you love or the things that worry you, the best reason to have a project. You know, you can have a project, for example, you work in a gallery and you had this amazing experience, for example, that we were talking a little while ago, with deaf people, because you had a deaf cousin. And those two worlds never met. And suddenly you think, no, why won't I just merge these two interests? Or it can be the other way around. You have a contemporary art space and school children never come in because the teachers don't see the relevance for their curricula. How can I bring them in? How can I have more people from that specific audience? Or you can have, for example, a very powerful segment for cultural organizations in rural areas are the people that love to do trekking and bicycle exercises, because they're always organizing programs in the weekends, in the holidays. They're very active. And why? And if you would step in and talk with them and tell them, we have a program of 1 hour while you rest or whatever, come in and see us. And maybe you can go. You're going through what people love. Don't think about this. This takes me to segmentation and people. And again, about roles and labels. Don't put people in boxes that they don't really fit in. For example, don't treat disabled visitors or users as such. They're not. They're people that like music or like painting. They're there because they like what you do. And then you have to create the conditions for them to come, of course. But don't put them in that box in all the aspects of your relation. Go beyond that, because they're there because they like you. So you have to pay that respect. And then value organization yourself. Really assert that in any place, with your funders, with your partners. Defend your intrinsic value of what you do. And some things are, of course, about value, about intrinsic value. And I have a big problem about the cultural impact studies that try to monetize everything that we do. We just participated in an ECOC bid, so we're well aware of the temptation to convert everything into economical impact. But it's not about that, it's about value. One of the things that the COVID crisis showed us was the strength of living in a social Europe, right? The way that Europe, and I'm not even talking about the European Union, I'm talking about Europe as a whole, the way that we have the social state in these different forms as the basis of our society was very, very important to overcome the COVID crisis, because people had doctors, people had hospitals, there was some kind of support system going on in a very organic way, because it's our way of life, it's the way that our societies are organized. So even in the worst moment, when nobody, the politicians, the decision makers, the health professionals, really knew what was going to be the next day, and everybody in the room really remembers this feeling, we knew that we had a structure behind us. It's different from United States of America with a private funding. It's different from South America. It's different from other countries. We really have that. And that's about the value of living together. And I think that this is also an opportunity for culture to assert itself as value making. It's not about it's not about what costs a spectator. It's about quality of life and enjoyment and happiness and pleasure for each of us in our lives. And it's not only about this selfish way of being individual, it's about why we connect with the planet, with others, and how we have the strength to help each other when we're doing that. But we can also have activities in projects, and when we discuss with it, that are about monetization. We can think about how many beers we're going to sell during the festival and how that income is going to help our budget, or how we can sell merchandise or anything else. Okay, so it's this balance that I really wanted you to bring in for the projects. And now, I think that we could just go up for like 2 minutes just to stretch our legs, because we're going to go for an exercise about ourselves, because I'm really tired of listening to me. And Ilídio, you can step in to talk about the SWOT, or I'll do that. You can step in, just to change. So let's just have a small break for 5 minutes, just to stretch out of the chairs, just wander around, and then we'll go for the practical part, and the people online will also do it. We wanted to challenge you, me and Ilídio, to now go for a hands-on perspective, because I know I just dumped all this information on top of you, and I know that it seems kind of abstract, but now we have this exercise for you to do. You have a pen or pencil, sheet of paper, and everybody at home also, and we just wanted you to do this diagram to help you think about your organization, because we're talking about organizations, we're talking about partnerships, we're talking about connections, but we have to start to work from inside our organization. And I'm going to, again, it's not inventing the wheel, it's about using useful management tools. And Ilídio, you can sit here close to me, because you'll take charge of the next part when you'll explain that. It's about finding your own resources. And one very useful tool is to create a sort of history of your organization, and is to use what we call SWOT analysis. You know what it's about, a very typical business tool. Yeah, I heard that. Yeah, I know, it's a horrible exercise. And if you do it quick and easy, it's because you're not doing it well. So SWOT analysis is a big invention from a marketing firm, and it's about identifying your strengths and your weaknesses. So what's your strong point as an organization, and what are your weak points? And it really seems like it's a boring, it's not much as a boring task, but it's really a very difficult one, because sometimes we go very, very quickly for the strong points, but then we have a huge problem going for the weak, or the opposite. Depends on what state of mind and the organization life we are. And then from there, we identify the opportunities and the threats. So what could be the opportunities for us? What could we bring to other partners? And what are the major threats for what we do, and how could we overcome them, again, with partners? So the goal is really, but we're going to give it a twist that Ilídio will explain. Should I share the screen, the scheme?
Yeah, sure. So the basis for trying to do this with you guys is because we have this challenge that Motovila gave us, trying to do the session in an hybrid way in the morning, and then in the afternoon going a bit more hands-on with the people in the room. And we wanted to, at the same time, trying to get everybody online and here in the room to think about their organizations in these terms, doing a bit of this SWOT analysis, but at the same time use then the results of this exercise in the later part of the work that we're gonna do in the room in the afternoon. So,
and it's also a useful tool for everybody.
Yeah, sure. It's always useful, and it will. In the afternoon, we're going to use this as a sort of a greeting card between ourselves, so that we can exchange experiences between ourselves, and you're going to see how we're going to do it. But right now, what we're going to try to do is to use this space to reflect a bit about trying to use this as a sort of a self-definition for the organization. So you have this, use this drawing as a representation of a piece of paper. And if you can, you draw that big circle in the middle. And in that big circle, I'm going to ask you guys to just write the name of your organization on top. Then try to write under the name of the organization what it is that you do, what actually is your area of work of expertise? Are you an art gallery? Are you a consultancy? Are you a digital media, music, performing arts organization? Are you a public institution? Whatever. And then underneath that definition, very basic definition of what your organization is, just give us a sense of how many people work in your organization. Between 50 and 70, between 100 and 200, between 5 and 10. Just write it down.
Me and me.
Yes, 1, 2, because we know there are organizations of 1 out there. And after that, as you do it in that circle, this is the very central basic definition of dimension, area of expertise, name. That's your calling card, you know, that you can show to someone. And then what we want you to do is start with the strengths that you see in your organization. What is it that is not necessarily the mission, but what you really value as your core added value to the society or to your field of expertise, what you think you really do well, what is your biggest strength as an organization. And go right to the weaknesses after that. That's exactly the opposite. What are the weakest points in the work you do, in the way you are structured? Don't overthink it. Just do it as a fast exercise. So don't try to do this throughout 15 or 20 minutes there at home, guys, online. Don't do it like that. Just give 2 or 3 minutes to each of these things. Then do the same thing for the opportunities and the threats. Think about, for about 2 or 3 minutes, what you see as the biggest opportunities out there right now, in this moment, for your organization, things that would actually, you think they would work, you are not so sure, or they present themselves as clear opportunities in your marketplace or in your area of expertise or in your region, as big opportunities for you guys. I know that here where we are, one of the biggest opportunities, of course, is the ECOC bid, right? In 3 years, 3 years, I think, right? You're going to have the ECOC, so that's a big opportunity for most of the organizations probably in this room. And then do the opposite. 2-3 minutes and think about the threats. So I'm going to give you a few minutes so you try to fill up the form. And then we're going to talk a bit about what you wrote, what you all wrote there, okay? So.
And online, we are going to try to bring people in, I don't know how, through the chat.
Yeah, sorry.
That will be a challenge. Yes, and I'm going to share also an exercise that can be interesting. After we finish this exercise, I'll show you an exercise that's very interesting for you to do within your organizations, because this is the kind of stuff that you can do, and share with your teams. Each of you can do this, and then just switch the papers and see how each of you sees your common organization. Or you can do another exercise that I will share with you in a few minutes, okay? So we'll give you 20 minutes for this? 10. 10 minutes. So we'll have 10 minutes for this.
You have to be fast and concise, and don't think too much about it.
So does anybody want to present their organization? Talk a little bit about themselves, about the circle in the middle? Yeah. So come to the sofa of shame.
Stage.
Yeah.
Okay.
But then they can see. So talk a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, I'm a senior curator educator in the regional museum, Gorizia GO, so the museum that covers 10 municipalities here in this region. Altogether, we are about 25 employed people. Of this, about 10 curators and 3 restorers. So the others are different staff, technical staff, director, and all the other people who are involved in the museum.
Okay. And what's your biggest strength as an organization?
I think that the museum research and the conservation of the objects, so one of the primal works in the museum, is pretty good. Also, the content we are delivering in exhibition is pretty good, and at the same time, it's one of our weaknesses, because without enough funding, the exhibitions sometimes don't look as they should look in some other museums. So if you don't have enough money, instead of having, I don't know, a TV screen like this one, you have a small one, and so on. So this, not because I'm the educator in the museum, but from the feedback of our guests, schools, also 5-year-old children, and so on, I think one of our strengths is our guided tours and the labs we have for kids. So this is one of the things that it's, I think, pretty good. So delivering our knowledge is good. I can say for all the curators in the museum. But like you said, some people are more tended to be good storytellers and presenting objects and everything. Some are, maybe they should have some workshops for improving themselves.
Or focus on research or doing what they do best. And if you went into a partnership, what would you offer? What would be like the basic resource that you could share?
If I'm talking about one of the projects that could be in, that is in the bid book for the ECOC, so the tactile gallery, myself, I'm pretty lot working with blind and blind impaired people. So with partners from, let's say, Italy, we could share our knowledge how to guide people through tactile paintings and so on. So it's not only everything about making everything already done for blind people to go on by themselves on the exhibition, but more how to guide them through exhibitions. And this is something that you are building slowly up, your knowledge, and this is something we could share with others, especially museums who are specialized with for blind and blindly impaired people.
Yeah, and you're talking about an open methodology. Yeah, I know, Matthias, I know. Thank you. You're talking about. Yeah. You're talking about an open methodology where you're learning with your users.
Yeah, so one thing is to share what we learned, so different organizations doing work on the same field, to share our knowledge. And this is something that could be very good for all of us.
No, that's a great asset. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
So now you can choose one of the colleagues. It's a tag game.
Let's start on the left. Well,
thank you so much.
Welcome.
And if anybody from the online wants to jump in, just let us know in the chat.
Ciao, I'm Dora. Hi, and I came from the Italian side of the border, but with Sever from San Pietro, from this more small mountain region. So I also with Vida part of an organization called Robida, but I choose to do my sketch on another one.
So like everybody has several jobs, several missions.
I would say that Robida is our love and passion, but I also work in another organization, which is a museum, formally also a institute, an organization who has a museum. So now I just start to work in the museum, which is a multimedia museum about the Italian-Slovenian border. And it's a small museum, all with installation, interactive installation, and also some cultural event and exhibition. So this is what it's doing, and all the content is about our research and also a presentation and for sure a collection of the history and the heritage of this area of the old border from the Sever to Trieste, so from Austria to Trieste.
It's all about the border, the relation between people around the border.
Especially about the Italian border, so how the Slovenian minority live and take care of the culture in Italy, because I would say that we have a Slovenian minority in Italy. The other way around is a bit more difficult, but historically is like this. So it's not a big institution. Is I would say 3 working person, but a lot of helps and partners and collaborators, especially from the local area. So it's very local, I would say, also as historically was born and instituted by people who were living there all their life. So they were very able to collect, understand, and also create a very large group of people who can also help and be part of the heritage that they were working with. So there is a big community around, but not very professionalized.
So you have like volunteers in the museum. It's a community-based museum.
Not really. I would say it's a community-based institution. So all the project, all the initiative are came from the need, from the also the research and the historical knowledge of people who were living there or most of the life. So they are very, very well prepared of what was the history of this place. And but the museum itself, now I'm working there, but the people who you can meet when you enter are not always from this area, are not always Slovenian and Italian speaker. Sometimes they are just Italian speaker. So there is not the possibility to have someone really sitting there to guests who arrived. So for now, I'm also doing this kind of role sometimes, but mostly I'm going to care about more the organization and also the I would say administration, also the project and the development of the project.
Management.
Yeah, and also another girl who is working there for longer time. She's more in the economical part of the management. So we are doing this like this, and there is a director of the museum. There are a lot of researchers and also the author of the multimedia content, so artist, I would say. And what is the problem is this, that we are not really professional, so we're not really organized. We don't have a very good communication, not a very, I would say, defined, and there is not a really defined project and ideas in.
So you're starting with your weaknesses, but what is your strong point? What is your strength?
I would say the strong point is this big group of people who can bring content and knowledge to this place. So the fact that you can really reach a very niche and a small aspect of history and local culture, I would say, so oral history, all what is about also that are mountain agricultural areas, so all this craftsman agricultural knowledge that we are losing. So in the last years, I think it's also a lot about this, what we are doing there, but also give a kind of scientific approach to this knowledge, so write books, organize exhibition, and also collecting and somehow collecting and somehow preserving the losing of this knowledge.
So you have a very strong ground because you have the community and you also have this knowledge basis, and that's very remarkable because you can do the content part, as you say. You're worried about the scientific content, but you have the most important thing that many organizations want to have is that you have the community behind you. So even if you're too few, because you're doing everything from almost cleaning the floor to receiving the tourists to everything, you have the very strong point with that, with the community.
Yeah, and maybe now I shift on the right. Yeah, so this community is quite old and not very big. I think that this is a very problematic point now because there are just not a lot of people involved, and also the future it's not really the best one because a lot of young people move out from this valley for studying and for and so but this is the project now also to work with who is still living there or who also could stay there also, or as me can come back to also because there are some opportunities, and I would say that the opportunities are the richness of the territory, this bilingual dimension, which is for sure something that it's about culture, but also in a good way, about founding, about creating special projects that can be made just there. And it's not a really developed area in sense of tourism and in sense of economic, so this is also a problem, but for sure it's also an opportunity, and maybe
that's an opportunity. Yes, if you check, I was talking about Voices of Culture because they have this very interesting report about underpopulated and rural areas and culture, and they have these fantastic projects for very small communities, and that could be an interesting starting point to discuss. Sorry? Yes, exurban dimensions for culture, and that's very, very interesting.
And also now Europe and Italy are kind of also waking up a bit of this funding and opportunity for this kind of development. So
yes, and you can have it can go from a seasonal project, like once a year you have this festival that brings people in, or you can have a structure. But that publication, there are people doing fantastic things, completely out of what we would imagine with very small communities.
Yeah, and also I think that now, also the idea of me working there, it's for me it's an opportunity, I would say, but also because with Vida we developed our project in a smaller village, really up on the mountain, in this context, quite a special context of Topolo, a very small village where it was able 30 years ago to create a art culture festival, but I think that she's gonna tell this later.
Okay, so do you want to tag her?
I think that our experience is now a bit also giving a bit of refreshment to this old area.
And I'll share with you a very interesting project in Cyprus that is about this idea of creating beautiful gardens as an artistic expression, because everybody can contribute. And it's also and they're very interesting possible partners, so I'll give you the contact.
Sure.
So do you want to tag? Who do you want to tag?
Yeah, maybe to be coherent in the discourse, I would tag Vida. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, Vida.
Hello. So yes, I'm bringing the experience of the association Robida, and I will present it with two, let's say, concepts. One, or themes. One is that it is an editorial project, so we have a magazine in different languages. The last one was in 9 different languages of Europe, and we also have a radio, a web radio. And the second, let's say, big or important theme for us is the place and the landscape and the community. So our work within the community, also not just the community of that little village which has 20 inhabitants, but a community which is also kind of larger and includes artists who we have in residencies and people who come. So also, yeah, this second, let's say, way of defining is maybe through this word rural in a way, no? Or marginal even.
And what is the magazine about?
The magazine has different topics. The last one, for example, was about the forest, and this one, which we are working on now, is about the island. So we usually choose a topic which is connected to the place where we live and work. For example, the island, it's a bit a strange concept, but it's because our village is a village in a sea, an island in a sea of trees somehow. So, and then we throw these concepts in the world, let's say, and we see how through these contributions we receive through open calls, we can maybe look at our situation with different eyes somehow. And we collect really contributions with, in the last number, from Australia to Brazil to US to all the different countries of Europe, and also including smaller languages, sometimes even without translation.
So each issue has different languages?
No, an issue has, so everyone can write in the language that he or she wants. And if they send the contribution without a translation, it will be published without a translation. Sometimes they add an abstract in English maybe, or yeah, also we speak different languages within the group, so we kind of can understand different languages, or someone also sends contributions which are in mixed languages. So for example, we had also one in Portuguese and English mixed within the contribution. So yeah, very interesting, and also experimental things come up from this kind of openness. And the people who are working on this project, which yes, is not just a magazine, is also a radio program we have every second Sunday, the whole day, Saturday, the whole day. We also have a collective space. We also have residencies for artists, etc. We are kind of between 5 and 10 people, but no one really working for it. So this, I would say, that is the weakness. But if we start from the strengths, let's say it's that we are all under 30 years old people. So this is kind of a strength.
I would like to be under 30 right now.
Exactly. Then that we are quite international, even if we come from a very marginal and small place. That we have a lot of collaborations with young people in Europe, that we are a good presence, let's say, in the Slovene minority, as Dora mentioned, and that, okay, also our editorial project is kind of unique, I would say, or interesting at least. And it's also interesting that it comes from such a small place. And
just remember what I was saying 20 minutes ago about value organization and value yourself. Your editorial project is fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah, okay. And also we are good in very, if we speak about simple things, in social media communication and maintaining a community of people and friends and supporters who are far away and really follow us and come to visit us. If I have to speak of weaknesses, of course, is the structure, the fact that we are still non-professional and we are trying to understand if it is possible to somehow become, and how, in really what are the different possibilities. Then we don't have a good communication, let's say, strategy on traditional media, especially in Italy. So because we think that we are so strong in social media, then we don't care so much about regional newspapers. Local, yes, so this is again a strength. We are very included in this minority context. And also maybe a weakness is that our collaborations, since maybe we collaborate with many people of our age, are not with institutional partners so much, but many times with spontaneous or informal groups, especially those collaborations with people with which we would like really to do projects, no? We have also collaborations with the Faculty of Architecture of Ljubljana, let's say, or with the Museum of Architecture of Ljubljana, but these partners are not so much like active partners, let's say. So this is also a complexity, how to find people with whom you would like to collaborate on a certain cultural level that you like, or that you are interested into, but that are also institutional. And the weakness, which is also our strength, so it's both, is this marginality, which is good and it's interesting, especially this our place is also very beautiful, so it's a strength, but at the same time it's a weakness because you cannot reach big numbers in general, and anyway you are in a very small, isolated and remote place, so it has these both sides of the coin, let's say. And the opportunities is, of course, Gorizia, Nova Gorica 2025, European Capital of Culture. No pressure. Then the opportunities are this, our internationality, being part of different networks that we are already kind of slowly starting to become part of. And also our opportunity is a beautiful space where we can host, invite, a space to share with other people, so people are really happy to come up. And threads are quite important, because if we find real jobs, like Dora maybe did, this is a bit a threat, because if all of us would find this, who would really support so much this our project, and also in general the abandonment of this place. So if I or others find a job in Ljubljana, of course we go away and maybe we miss a bit, or we lose a bit, or the project loses a bit the sense. And also a threat is not finding the right size or proportion between being very local and small and being international. Yeah, it's not a threat, it's a complexity, let's say, to navigate.
Yes, it is, but it's very interesting because maybe even if you go away, you can, since you're so used to the online cooperation, maybe it can be a volunteer-based project, even if you have small fundings. I don't know, I think it's a beautiful project.
Yeah, we have really to understand. So we are in this phase a bit right now.
Yeah.
Also with these small fundings, many small fundings don't make a big funding, no? In a way, because they don't give you the opportunity to be structured, and then you are every time again starting with another thing.
You're totally right. And the problem of many small fundings also is that you stretch your resources to answer to different demands, because each funder comes in and asks for different things. So you're so stretched to answer to different things that that's a huge challenge, yes. And it's one of the things that we felt with the ADEST Plus project was that for big institutions, for example, for a museum that's state-owned, or for the foundation, the challenge was to freeze, like stop what you do every day because you have the money and the resources, stop and let's think together about an audience development scheme. But the problem with small organizations, micro-organizations, was exactly the opposite, because if you stop, the money will stop coming in and you can't even pay for the electricity. So it's this difficult balance that happens. And there are very interesting projects that can stem from this idea of being volunteer-based. And when you're talking about volunteer-based, it's not like it's less professional or less, it has less quality in the content. It's about the effort you can put in. But that's a difficult balance, you're totally right. But maybe in a partnership, because you can have volunteers from the European Volunteer Service, there's a lot of things that could just go into the project. Congratulations.
Good luck.
So guys, we can continue in the afternoon, and Vida will tag the next person in the afternoon, so treat her well during lunch break. And I'm just going to share with you guys, everybody, I think that from the online we don't have volunteers, so I'm just going to try to find the link to show about the history. So we wanted to finish with this example of a good organizational tool for you.
Yeah, this is, as I was telling you guys, this challenge of doing it hybrid and then live in the afternoon was a bit stretching for us, but I remember this this exercise. I tried to do this twice, and ended up doing it in very different ways from what is stated here. This is a facilitation website called Gamestorming. It has a lot of nice ideas about facilitation workshop structures that you can use to work. And one of the exercises that you can use to go a bit deeper into reflecting about your own organization is this history map. So the SWOT exercise we did was just a fast way of trying to capture the first things that come up to our minds about what we are and what we do in our organizations. This history map goes the other way around. It does exactly the opposite. You're supposed to use about between half an hour and 2 hours in a group of people of the same organization. So you go back to your office or to your design atelier or to your public institution or whatever, and you grab a team of 3 to 5 to 7 people, maybe even larger. They suggest doing it with very large groups of people here in the website, and you try to basically map out the story of the organization as a narrative path. And in the end, you come up with basically a timeline of the foundation, the challenges, the big obstacles, the big projects, the big successes and failures of the organization that comes out of this work that you do together. And I've done this as a methodology, a bit crossing this with tools that we use of design thinking in other workshops, but it is basically structured discussion in the organization. It's very interesting. I think you should take a good look at the exercise in the link in the website, because it would be a bit boring trying to describe it. But the idea is to just do exactly the opposite of the SWOT analysis we did here. And what comes out of this is basically a bit like in the ACE, as Inês was describing in the Adeste Plus project. What we find out by using these design thinking tools of trying to work horizontally in organizations, trying to reach out to people not only in the different strata of the hierarchy, but horizontally from wherever they are in your organization, and putting them to work, putting the director to work with the technician, with the front of office ticket selling person, and giving them the same power to affect the final result of the workshop. What you find out as you try to breaking down these silos, you find that your organization has a lot more creativity and knowledge than you expected it to have. Because most of the people that work in different levels of the organization can offer a lot more than you think to your main core vision and mission and to your main activity. You just have to reach out and find ways of giving them the opportunity to express the value and the knowledge that they have. And this history map is very valuable also as an exercise, because by placing everybody in a horizontal way in this exercise, trying to give them an opportunity to express what is their image and the narrative image of what the organization is or was and what is its history, you come up with a collective negotiated history of the organization that wouldn't be your take on it. It wouldn't be the take of any individual, but it's actually an exercise in trying to negotiate what is actually the mission and what is actually your main core value to add to society. So it is a way of trying to clarify, in a certain sense, who you are, and at the same time, team build. It's basically that. So, but it is very different from what we did just back there, and it is quite impossible to do it here. But we wanted to share it with you because I think it's a very nice starting point for everybody, including online, to think about trying to build something inside their organizations in a sort of a do-it-yourself way.
Yeah, and you can really trust the methodology. Like, you don't have to have tried it before. Just organize the exercise, call people in, give them coffee and cookies, and challenging from a nice morning together, since everybody's going back to the offices, can be a good opportunity. So just to close, does anybody want to have a question for this morning? Or is everybody too hungry or too tired from the Zoom? And we'll just close.
I will do it in English so that Inês and Ilídio can understand. So, because I'm not sure that everybody here and online is aware how precious it is that we managed to get you physically in Nova Gorica. So I hope that you are aware of the fact that this universe is not functioning as it used to function 2 years ago. So we really appreciate, and I really wanted to give a comment that it was really hard for them personally to travel here and for us to organize everything. So I really appreciate, and I wanted to underline that maybe everybody here is tired and online, because this is really a huge topic, and everything that you underlined would need additional 1 week workshop to concentrate upon, but I would really like to maybe 2 thoughts I had while listening to you, that because probably some of the participants think, where's the recipe for audience development? Where's the tool? Where's the magic stick that will just solve all our problems? And we believe that problems with audience development and audience engagement were huge even before the crisis, so now are even bigger, as you said. And I still feel that nobody here is aware that dealing with audience development means involving the whole team, no matter how big or small it is, and that actually everything is interlinked. That's why you cannot provide magic tools. So we cannot remain in the bubble of our team, of our organization, and even not within the bubble of our sector. So maybe if we learned this today, it's already a big deal. So I really appreciate you being here and sharing this with us, and I'm looking forward to the workshop. Some of us will be able to follow, and we are looking forward to welcome you again in Slovenia. So thank you.